Okay, so I'm going to use the microphone, and this is the method where the camera stays stationary on a graffito, and you're using a flash, and you're lighting the surface from about 50 different angles, and then you take a picture at each angle, and you merge those images into a single file with some fancy software, and it actually has some nice different kinds of computational viewing modes that we don't have in the web viewer. But even with the web viewer, I think you can see, like, versus this, lit full flat light from the front, you can see, if you go up here, you can see the figure's kilt a little bit more. He's wearing a skirt, patterned skirt. You can see, you can start to see the back arm better. There's, I think, a little bit of finger action used to be down here. As you come around, you can see the front arm more. You can start to see the outline of the figure behind him, too. Let's have a look at the offering table that I wanted to show you. Oh, yeah. Those are not his eyes. Yeah, those are later. The column had chipped off there, like the surface is chipped off, and those are at a slightly different level. All right, so here's the offering table. And just as you move the light around the surface, I think you can start to see some, I think there was decoration in the inside of this. There is a palm front there, yeah. We can see that a little bit better too. There's also legs over here. There's some legs. I don't know. Thanks for that, Jeff. I think my point is just that these graffiti could have had a lot of detail that we can't see anymore. Yeah. And then one more, we're going to look at another human. These are actually really cool too. These would be really fun to look at. I was going to show you this guy. I think this is one of Jeff's favorite graffiti. Would you agree with that? So this is fancy guy on fancy horse. But as you move the light around, you can start to see things going on with the horses. He's got like a fancy sort of collar situation, very decorative. Up here you can start to see the man a little bit better, his proper right arm coming here, his left arm, he has a little armpit, something happening here. There's also a lot of detail in this area that is very worn, that as you move the light, you can, start to see. We got a little bit of a lag happening here, but yeah. So those were the examples that I was going to show you in my talk. Yes, Carrie. Yes, we think that there is red pigment in the legs. It's one of the only ones where I feel pretty confident that there could have been pigment. Okay. With that, I will pull up the PowerPoint for our next speaker, Dr. Jeremy Pope. And in case you didn't see this, we have bios of all the speakers on the back of the program, so we're not doing long introductions for folks today, but you can read about them on the back. Welcome, Jeremy.
Back now? That's better. All right. Okay, so a point of comparison here. The island of Philae. Now, to the casual observer, the island of Philae in Egypt may seem like it's a world apart from El Kuru in the Kushite heartland of Upper Nubia. After all, to begin with, the two sites are separated by roughly 800 kilometers. And unlike Kuru, the monuments of Philae also display an elaborate series of sculptured relief scenes, most of them commissioned by Ptolemaic kings and Roman emperors. In addition, those monuments at Philae are covered with more than 1,000 specifically textual graffiti, some of them written in Greek, others in several different Egyptian cursive scripts. These textual graffiti are ubiquitous at Philae, but they find few parallels at Kourou. So on these grounds, Philae and Kourou might appear to be points of contrast rather than context. And yet, the cultural distance between Philae and Kourou is something of an illusion. To begin with, the earliest surviving monuments at Philae are inscribed with the name of Taharko, a Kushite pharaoh whose dynastic line was actually buried at Kourou. From its very foundations, the main temple at Philae, the Isis temple, was oriented toward the south. So you can see by this arrow here and up there on the map. And it was also in later times fronted by small chapels devoted to specifically Nubian gods, Mandalus and Arsinophis. In fact, Philae was much more accessible to travelers from the south than to those coming from the north. Visitors coming to Philae from Nubia would ultimately reach the island before their boats approached the dangerous boulders of the First Cataract. By contrast, though, the visitors coming from Egypt, they had to navigate the entirety of that cataract if they wished to reach the island of Philae. So it's hardly surprising then that the island's monuments were initiated by Kushite pharaohs from Nubia, and that they were then built to face Nubia. But most significantly, at least in my view, some of the textual graffiti at Philae, for which Philae is so famous, were commissioned by visitors from Nubia who explicitly stated that they had been sent there by the Kushite king in Upper Nubia specifically. The texts that you see right here in this image were even written in the Meroitic language and script of Nubia. So it's not just Greek texts and Egyptian texts there, but you also get those written in the language of Nubia, the Meroitic language. Now, Philae's ties to the distant reaches of Upper Nubia run even deeper than that. The two most extensive studies of the Philae graffiti in recent years by Jean Cruz-Uribe and Solange Ashby have both concluded that the priesthood of Philae during the final centuries of the Roman era was actually appointed from distant Meroe, which is really at the southernmost fringe of what we call Upper Nubia. So there was not a chasm of culture separating Philae from Upper Nubia. Despite the distance between Philae and Kourou, and despite the much greater number of texts found at Philae, these sites were likely used by many of the same individuals. They were, at the very least, part of a shared network during the Meroitic era specifically, and perhaps in other eras as well. Consequently, the figural graffiti discovered at Philae are often directly relevant to those found at Kourou. Consider, for instance, the image that you'll see here on the right of the slide, which you've seen several times already today. A rectangular graffito found at Kourou that is inscribed with several internal lines, and most conspicuously that infamous X in a box, the large X in the center. Now, Jeff's team has proposed to interpret this as a textile of some sort, partly because the small lines extending from its upper and lower edges seem to represent a fringe. Well, comparison with the figural graffiti on the island of Philae supports this interpretation, because we find there the enclosed X symbol as a decoration upon flags. The flag on the left displayed from the deck of a boat, and the other, in the middle, flying from a lone pole. Now, in my essay for the catalog for this exhibition, I tentatively proposed that this X symbol might have had some specifically cultic or votive significance to the artist. Here's why I lean in that direction. At Philae, this X is repeatedly drawn inside of squares that are open at one end, like the graffito that you'll see here on the left. As you've already noticed in previous presentations, the outline of this graffito matches the shape of an offering table, an object that priests used for the pouring of ritual libations. And so the X symbol thereby decorated one of the sacred implements in a funerary temple and a temple in a sacred context. Now, the graffiti at Kourou do not make this connection as clearly because graffiti of offering tables, like the one you see here on the right, are not adorned there with the same X. However, we do find at Kourou that X symbol beside a horned fire altar here. So another sacred implement in a temple context. So in this way, parallels between the graffiti at Philae and at Kourou frequently have a tendency to illuminate one another, suggesting a shared world of religious objects and religious symbols. Even so, my comparison of the graffiti at Philae and Kourou ended up revealing more differences than similarities. Now, this might at first seem surprising, because I've been at pains here to emphasize that these two sites, I think, were used by the same network of individuals. But if we think about this fact that they were used by the same network of individuals, or likely were, that in no way requires that those individuals would have left identical graffiti at both sites across the whole of Nubia. In antiquity, Nubia appears to have been a rather vast country, one with a considerable internal cultural diversity, so that certain symbols may have been unique to a single temple or single region. I'll give you an illustrative example here. This bouquet of plants that you'll see here in these two slides, and I'll actually highlight them for you here in red. So this bouquet of plants held by both gods and men in the graffiti at Philae. These are found repeatedly among the graffiti, not just of Philae, but of Lower Nubia as a whole, the northernmost part of Nubia. They're not so well attested beyond that region. So the Egyptologist Tsubasa Sakamoto recently published a detailed study of this Lower Nubian motif, and he concludes that it symbolized Upper Nubian control of the Lower Nubian temples during the late 3rd century AD. So what that would mean then is that the bouquet symbol was evidently chosen by, or perhaps for, visitors from as far away as Upper Nubia, who then employed that symbol not in Upper Nubia itself, but instead at the distant border with Egypt. In short, the symbol manifested a sort of interregional exchange, but it did so on a local scale. It was an international symbol, but manifested in one specific local context. Now, at Philae, it is often the accompaniment of textual evidence that actually allows us to discern with confidence the historical context of the figural graffiti that we have there. They end up functioning together so that analysis of one is integral to analysis of the other. This relationship between figural and textual graffiti raises 2 points that I think are worth underscoring for our conversation here today. The first is that we should be careful not to casually assume that figures were a substitute for text, that figural graffiti were drawn more often in places where literacy levels were low. The example of Philae decisively refutes any such correlation, because it has so many texts and so many figural graffiti, and they seem to be paired in many cases. Then secondly, this may be obvious, but I think it's worth underscoring, I think we have to resist the temptation to regard ancient graffiti as somehow parasitic, vandalism, if you will. This is a modern, anachronistic assumption. a visitor's informal drawing or written testimony upon a temple wall did not necessarily disfigure sacred space. Rather, those graffiti demonstrated the continued life of the temple, and to put it another way, its symbiosis with pilgrimage. It's not parasitic, it's symbiotic. And I think it's in this latter aspect that the graffiti at Philae might be most relevant to those at Kourou. Not through direct equivalence of one symbol with another, but through analogy. I'll show you what I mean. Consider the case of the boat graffiti at each site. The shapes and details of boats drawn at Philae and at Kourou really have very little in common with one another. And they seem to derive from quite different eras. So a superficial analysis of the boats at Philae and Kourou and an attempt to compare them might be able to do little more than infer the importance of the river at both sites, which is not very satisfying. But at Philae, we have an unusual advantage. We have a dense matrix of contemporaneous evidence. The boat graffiti at Philae consistently appear directly beside and below windows, these little windows here. Windows that pierced through the western colonnade, which allowed visitors to look out from the dromos of the temple to see a boat crossing the river from Philae to the neighboring island of Biga that you see here in the foreground. And right on that gateway that's about to go off screen there on the left, on the right door jamb of that gateway that you see there on the left, there is actually the figure of a man, which really is not unlike the human figures that are carved upon the columns at Kourou. But here at Philae, he's named by means of a cursive text right in front of him. It reads simply, Sasan. Now, if we then turn our attention to an adjacent block of stone on that same door jamb of that gateway, we find a much longer text commissioned by that same man, Sasan, specifically on the 10th of April in AD 253. He's titled as Merowe's great envoy to Rome, and he describes how he came to the island of Philae to participate in the Koyak festival, during which a statue of Isis was ferried from Philae to the neighboring island of Biga so that the goddess could visit her husband, Osiris. Like the others who drew boats next to the windows of that western colonnade, Sasan had traveled roughly 800 kilometers to see Isis's statue as it crossed the river by boat as a part of this festival. And he closed his graffito here with the following prayer to the goddess Isis. He says, "My lady, listen to me so that I might be brought back to Merowe. I came here in order to bring myself to Egypt together with my brother, Hor Uja. My lady, Isis, you are the mistress of the road. Our hearts are entrusted to you upon the way to bring us to the road of life, while we call to you on every occasion, saying, listen to us. I am your good servant, Isis. My heart is left to you in Egypt, at Merowe, and in the mountains. Isis, this is the only brother I have. I am going to leave him, and I say to you, keep him safe until you bring me back to Egypt." That's what we have at the end of this text, his prayer to the goddess Isis. This sort of poignant testimony shows that the mute pictures scrawled on the walls of Philae and elsewhere are not merely casual scribbles or boasts. They could also memorialize highly personal moments of piety, of ambition, of anxiety, of affection, of gratitude, in this case of gratitude to the goddess Isis for having brought him safe. The larger point I want to make here is that the graffiti at Kourou may have had very similar backstories. And thus, a comparison between the graffiti at Philae with those at Kourou serves as a reminder that figural graffiti were frequently marks of very personal devotion. Now, as I close here, I just want to acknowledge my profound debt to the late Gene Cruz-Uribe. Most of what we know about the figural and textural graffiti at the island of Philae is really the result of Gene's research, and also his exemplary generosity in making all of his digital photographs available to anyone who wants to look at them online. So they're all up there online in high resolution. I also want to thank Steve Vinson and Solange Ashby for additional photographs. Thank you. So are there questions?
I'll ask one about that. I think you talked about the early graffiti. There are the Roman period graffiti contemporary with them, or do they alternate, or is there a way to tell?
Yeah, it's not clear to me whether or not there are any that are directly contemporary. You would expect that, though, because the site is in use over such a long period of time, and there's such a density of graffiti. It's hard to convey this to people, but there are very few sites that have this much informal decoration and informal writing on every surface. I mean, it's just, at Philae, it's like every possible surface someone has left a mark. So I wouldn't be surprised to find examples where you find these contemporaneous with one another, but I don't know of an example off the top of my head. Any additional questions? Yeah.
So one of the market differences between Peru and Chile is that one has text and the other doesn't.
Yeah.
Any speculations on why Peru is virtually total absence of text?
Yeah, I have a theory that I can't prove. And it's not some, really revolutionary theory, but I honestly believe that there was much more perishable materials for writing used. There was a lot of papyrus used that we simply don't have anymore. I can't prove this because we don't really find much papyrus in Sudan outside of a place like Qasr Ibrahim. There's not a lot that's left. Claude Reilly told me once that this might be the result of termites that are indigenous to Sudan that tends to eat that stuff. My leaning in that direction. Papyrus. Okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Graffiti. Yeah, they're wiping out the stone. No. This was a casual aside, and Claude just said, well, he mentioned there's some sort of white termite that would actually feast upon papyrus. Their founder, Qasr Ibrahim, the reason why I sort of lean in that direction is simply because when you look at Kushite inscriptions, and I'm thinking like 25th dynasty and Napatan period, if you study them very closely, the influence of cursive scripts is very notable. Hieratic text has a really profound influence on the way they chose to write the actual hieroglyphs. And that's kind of striking given how little papyrus we've actually found there. So I don't really think it's a function of like the absence of text here at Kuru I would not attribute to a really low literacy level compared to Egypt. I really think it's a question of survival of the materials, but I can't prove it, right? Any additional questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
This goes into the text in box question, which
Yeah.
I think we have not quite got to the bottom of. So,
It's only next to Horned Altar.
okay,
Right.
but look at this. So this is one of these challenges you find in looking at graffiti. Doesn't that look like raised arms? Like as if
Yeah.
this is some sort of a block-like worshiper figure? I mean,
With the X, so.
it's not a standard representation. It's not one like we've
Right.
seen anywhere else.
You can also kind of see legs. Like if you look at it in the RTI, you can start to see.
And I will say that.
So, like right here,
Yeah.
No,
With feet, or-
just down to there. I
just
think.
down to there, no feet.
Most of the, there's a little, I think there's a little foot-like thing right in there.
Okay, I interrupted you,
It's a
sorry.
really crummy looking and strange looking worshiper figure. And I will admit that there's a lot of embarrassment in doing research on this stuff. Because you see things and then anyway.
So it's a, yeah,
One of the things I like about the offering table interpretations is that there's so many of them. I mean, that would be a ready sort of interpretation. So sometimes I'm discarding it completely, but
I mean, I don't know what it would have signified, but it just seems striking to me that it, at least among these examples, it's consistently appearing next to something or on something that's sacred in some way. So I don't think it's so random, is essentially what I'm saying. Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Lecture with words of thanks and appreciation. So let me start my lecture with similar words. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this symposium, superbly organized in one of the sanctuaries of world archaeology. It's a particular pleasure for me to acquaint you today with some of the achievements of my team in Banganarti. All the more so that this year marks the 20th anniversary of our work in Banganarti, in this remarkable site. So being an archaeologist, I start from the very beginning. So the story of Banganarti begins in late 6th century after conversion to Christianity of three Nubian kingdoms, Nubadia in the north, Alwa in the south, and Makuria in the middle. Banganarti in English, the locust island, sits on the right bank of the Nile, 7 kilometers upriver from Tungul, the capital of the kingdom of Makuria. The last season at Banganarti ascertained the presence of multi-phased monastery there, in its early phase surrounded by Peribolos, the enclosure, and late Xenodocheion, that is Pilgrim shelter with dormitory, bath, kitchen, and latrine. And the story of emergence, fluid decline and fall of the pilgrimage center in Banganarti is implicitly written in the graffiti preserved from the walls of 2 superimposed churches, both dedicated to Archangel Raphael. Most of these texts are graffiti scratched on the walls of the upper church by pilgrims themselves or by church attendants on behalf of them in the 14th century. The upper church in Banganarti, also known as Raphaelian, was built in the second half of the 11th century. After its predecessor, the lower church was razed to the ground. Consecration of the upper church is mentioned by Bishop Georgios of Natu, is mentioned in the history of the history of patriarchs of the Church of Alexandria. During its history as one of the most important pilgrimage centers on the Middle Nile, Raphaelion survived a series of construction disasters resulted from the lack of knowledge of the local geomorphological realities by the masons apparently brought from Byzantium. The foreign foremen left some fingerprints of their craft, as, for example, the recessed brick technique typical for the late 10th, early 11th centuries Byzantine architecture. The idea to construct the upper church was plausibly Byzantine, but the idea to reconstruct it was for sure American. This manner of reconstructing historical object in the form of a steel skeleton model usually results from inadequate archaeological information to properly reconstruct the structure. It's called the Philadelphian reconstruction in memory of the bravura reconstruction of Franklin Court in Philadelphia by Venturi and Rauch during the United States bicentennial celebration. The Banganarti tubular steel ghost structure recreates the skyline of the upper church, revealing its unique architecture features as perfect symmetry, high central dome, and four corner cupolas. Excavations inside the upper church rewarded us with tons of amphorae, liturgical paraphernalia, stone architecture, decorations, and so on, not to mention a series of stone epitaphs in Greek, 60 murals, including 12 portraits of court dignitaries and kings of Makuria, in 9 cases accompanied by Apostle College. And last but not least, there were almost 1,000 pilgrim graffiti scratched or painted on the walls of both churches. The Banganarti wall inscriptions paint a picture of well-organized, religiously homogeneous society, providing also a glimpse into its social order, church hierarchy, and administrative structure. The figurative drawings, representing mostly animals, the motifs typical rather for rock art than church iconography, were created simultaneously with the text graffiti, what is very important, just contrary to some other claims of some other scholars who claimed and still claim that these were just applied to the walls after the church was abandoned. That is apparently not true. The custom of writing names on the walls or leaving other trace of one's presence in place considered sacred arises from the pre-medieval mentality in which a person's name was considered a part of somebody's identity, being the person's substitute of a sort. Thus, the benefits from a visit to a holy place were extended in time by leaving a graffito which identified the pilgrim and represented him through the virtue of his name, origin, occupation, and other biographical details. But it's not that simple, because the anonymous graffiti, which do not contain the pilgrim's name, are also common, very common in Banganarti. When the supplicant name is not mentioned in the graffito, he or she is anonymously introduced in the text as the one whose name is known to the god, or simply by the Greek word kago, that is a crasis and contraction for kai ego and myself. Such intentionally omitting the pilgrim's name can be observed in a graffito from the Raphaelion that depicts a giraffe and an antelope accompanied by the word kame in Greek, preceded by a cross. Kame stands neither for kam, the Nubian for camel, nor for camelopardalis, that is Greek for giraffe. It's one again a construction for kai eme and myself. Needless to say, such a construction was applied because the scribe was asked to hide the name of the man who commissioned the graffiti. And another procedure, an attempt at camouflaging the name, is clearly seen in the graffiti of a pilgrim named Rafakuda on the right, who wrote his name from right to left and with mirrored letters. Such way of writing, called in Latin versus retrogradus, is well attested in magical treatises and in inscription from Hellenistic and Roman Egypt. And this camouflaging, hiding and concealing the name is very interesting. And Jeff just produced a mural from the newly discovered church on Comage in Dongola, showing Nubian king under the holy patronage of Jesus Christ. You know, in this church, I was informed quite recently, before my departure to Ann Arbor, by Adam Whiter, chief epigraphist to Banganarti and Dongola Mission, that very interesting graffiti was found with a very rare inscription in Arabic. The guy, the pilgrim, simply, instead of writing his name, just simply wrote Isim in Arabic. Isim means a name, without specifying what name he meant. He wanted to keep it secret because of some reason. Interestingly, the attitudes towards the holy, the forms of asking for grace and the methods of winning the favor of the saints were different in the case of the lower and upper churches. The archaeological evidence clearly suggests that in the 11th century, pilgrims' expectation and forms of communicating with the holy underwent a substantial change. The archaeological evidence says that the pilgrimages to Banganarti started well before the upper church was built, in the 9th century or even earlier, when two individuals, certainly highly meritorious to the local community, were buried in huge tombs raised against the eastern wall of the lower church. Pilgrims who came to visit their burial place did not leave written mementos of their visit in the church itself, but nevertheless they left traces of their presence in the form of the so-called pilgrim scoops, that is, hollowings abraded in the sandstone wall of the church vis-à-vis the tomb. The miraculous powder that's obtained, being a pulverized fabric of the holy place, was taken home and after mixing with water, used as a medicine in case of illness, of danger. There is a huge literary textual evidence for such a practice, even in the miracles of Saint Damianos, whose mural is painted in Banganarti. The situation changed dramatically when the upper church was built. Its 3 entrances and two staircases allowed crowds of pilgrims and easy access to the nave, the galleries, and above all, to the ultimate focal point of the church. That is to the octagonal freestanding structure raised beneath the central dome, thus being the ritual and geometric axis of the church. The pilgrim probably circumambulated the analogion. In similar way, the Hujuj used to circumambulate the Kaaba in Mecca. What was placed on analogion, we can only guess, could be wonder-working icon or reliquary. It's just, there is much more probable solution. Analogion is a perfect place to display the relics. You probably knew that in 2011, the most sacred relics of Eastern Christianity, the cincture of Theotokos, of Mother of God, visited Russia, and it was put on analogion in each biggest Orthodox church in Russia, just to allow millions of people a closer contact with these relics. Next, the mention of King City of the Nubian kingdom of Dotao in two graffiti suggests the first half of the 14th century as the most plausible date for the creation of most of Banganarti graffiti. The chronology of the upper church is based on two important dates: the consecration by Bishop Georgios in 1072 and the last reconstruction that happened after the 11th of November 1280. The graffiti containing the later date was scratched next to the southern entrance to the church. The exact date of it was just commissioned or written by Pilgrim named Teita. We don't know whether Teita was man or woman because Old Nubian doesn't recognize the gender. But we know that he came on this precisely on this day, and the exact date of his visit was brilliantly calculated by Adam Whiter on the basis of three chronological indications contained in the text. The inscription was covered with black plaster, so it provides the antechrem date for the last reconstruction of the church for laying of putting a new layer of plaster on which most of the inscriptions were written. Thanks to the study of Banganarti graffiti, we know that the original Nubian name of Makurian capital, Old Dongola today, was Tungul. A graffito that provides this piece of information is applied to the western wall of the corridor leading to northern entrance. It accompanies the only royal representation in the upper church, which is scratched, not painted. It's also the only one showing a mounted king. It's a poor analogy, but the only one to the famous King Silko graffito from Kalapsha. The rider to the right is named by the inscription as Paper, Basileus Brephos, that is small king of the town of Tungul. His royalty is indicated by the typical Nubian horned headgear he wears. Although the eastern chapels of Raphaelian contain the portraits of kings of Makuria, it was the Archangel Raphael who received the main reverence and honor there. An unusual spelling of Raphael's name in some of the Banganarti inscriptions exemplifies his virtue as a healer of eyes. You know, without affecting the orthography of the name, there is a pair of eyes inserted on both sides of the stroke in letter Phi, or just a pair of wings is attached to the upper part of this letter. And in one monogram of Raphael, both iconic elements are incorporated into the monogram. The eyes do not seem to be apotropaic, rather they denote the therapeutic aspects of Raphael cult, which on the strength of the biblical precedents acclaimed him as a healer of eye disease. Among the plethora of picture graffiti, there is one image of a pilgrim. The drawing depicts a man wearing a knee-length skirt. In a manner typical for the blind, he feels the ground in front of him with a walking stick. According to Adam Whiter, the inscription scratched beneath the image transliterates two Arabic words, Dif Ali, written as Diof Ali, Ali the guest, using the letters of the Greek alphabet, because the church scribe knew only Greek, so he just understood Arabic, but couldn't write in this language. Apparently, Ali was Muslim, since it's hard to imagine that in 12th century Christian could have such a name. He apparently came to Banganarti attracted by the thaumaturgical esteem of the place where eye disease were cured by the intercession of the Archangel Raphael. Whether his eyesight was just brought back, recovered, we don't know. As I already mentioned, the walls of the upper church yielded a huge collection of figure graffiti, which almost totally lack in the lower church. Among 40 animal drawings, there are 27 camel representations. Evidently, the herders, hunters, and camel owners were frequent visitors to upper church. One of them commissioned or drawn himself a narrative scene which depicts an animal hunt. It shows a fragmentarily preserved figure of a hunter with safarot. Safarot is not returning boomerang, it's a throwing stick still used by the Beja tribesmen, the original you see on the right. The graffiti of the highest informative value was barely visible on the side wall in the southern part of the church. It was a miracle that Adam Whiter just noticed it, and Thomas Płóciennik translated it. It was squeezed in between the framed Greek legend to the painting depicting apparition of Jesus Christ to doubting Thomas and old Nubian inscription. The text translated, as I said, by Tomasz Płóciennik in Catalan Provençal language is very laconic. It says, Benešek came to pay homage to Raphael. It's the only wall inscription in Latin alphabet known from the Christian period in Nubia. The man who scratched the text came from southern France or northern Spain in the 14th century. A large number of pilgrim graffiti in late Christian Banganarti must have its roots in the political and economic situation of the kingdom. The outburst of individual messages to the holy that appeared on the walls of Nubian churches in the 14th century coincides with the general decline of the authority of the state, lack of safety, economic collapse, and general impoverishment of the population. Understandably, the people in the face of lurking threats rather entrusted their fate to the protection of God and his messengers than to the ailing state. The psychological climate of the time is reflected in many of Banganarti inscriptions. One applied to the wall below Benešek graffito is addressed to God, who set up Raphael as a helper of every man. And it ends with a request: make us live in the land that does not have the harshness of the evil one. Come manifest yourself, hear us all. Or in another inscription, in another graffito, an official named Papa, who was a deacon of the Church of Jesus, probably in Tungul, and the man who was a tegna of the town on the island of Michael asked Raphael for salvation from the dangers, for throwing out every enemy and keeping them away from the sudden death. Significantly, the second man kept his name secret. A sketchy drawing in black paint depicting a framed icon was probably made with a similar intention. It was found on the wall of the lower church next to the scene of St. Mercurius spearing Julian the Apostate. It's a stylistic intrusion. It's a drawing. It was put in the painting. Oh my God. The graffiti plausibly represents a wonder-working icon venerated in Banganarti Church. Theotokos is apparently addressed here in a communal request for grace, intercession, and patronage in the face of a danger that threatened the whole community of Banganarti. In times to come, this threat would become an inseparable component of everyday life in Banganarti. Paradoxically, we owe to this threat a superb collection of graffiti that conveys a most realistic picture of medieval Nubian mentality and popular religion. Thank you for your attention, and I do apologize for subjecting you, for subjecting your subject to such hard trial. Sorry, just turn around fast here. Question?
We have time for questions? Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, so you said I think 27 of the 40 animal graffiti were camels.
Yeah.
So one interpretation we've been moving toward for the temple graffiti in Peru is that pilgrims often represent their mode of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what if you might see something similar in those representations of a whole bunch of camels.
Probably, yes, definitely. You know, the camel is a pack animal. You know, it's used for transportation even today. And you know, there are no saddles. This Mafi Mahalufa. You know, there is no camel saddle on top of these camels. You know, I think these are herders. You know. Yes, really, it supports your view that this was because of the economic role and economic significance of this animal in the everyday life and in the trade. You know, that was the time when there were very, very frequent contacts with Darfur and Kordofan, because Banganarti sits opposite Abu Gussi, that is the river terminal for the very important trade route along Wadi el Malik to North Kordofan and Darfur. And you know that's trade with southern regions, with Kordofan, and trade in slaves and cattle was the basic element behind, you know, economic ascendancy of the kingdom. When the Muslims, you know, took possession of these trade routes, simply Nubia collapsed. So really, camel was most important in those days. We have also images, representation of pigs. That's very interesting because pig, according to literary sources, was most popular offering brought by the pilgrims to the pilgrimage centers. And we have pigsties in Banganarti, close to the church. You know, religious, and the texts say that the pigs were just rolling among the pilgrims awaiting miraculous healing during incubation in pilgrimage centers. That sounds incredible, but that's what the texts say. There's no reason not to believe in the texts. And other weekend horses, you know, the next are horses and gazelle. And what next? And the cattle, of course. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Bogdan. First, I would like to thank the organizers to having me here in Michigan to talk about the rock drawings in Nubia. The topic graffiti, I think, is very interesting because we have many graffiti in Sudan, and nobody, I think, concentrated study in this topic. So I studied the area which was completely now underwater. It was endangered by the Marawi Dam, the construction of Marawi Dam in between the 4th cataract and 5th cataract, which that Antiquity Service in Sudan make an appeal for all the international archaeologists to help the Sudan to save this area. That why I choose the topic of the rock drawings in this area, because during this the survey we find a lot of sites, but I concentrated in this time in three big sites. So the first one in the National Corporation for Antiquities and Museum concession, just close to the dam site, and the second one, the concession of the University of Cologne in Germany in the Bonny Island. The third one, the concession of the Humboldt University. It's just on the area of Mograt Island. So the rock drawings in this area distribute in the variety and many archaeological sites close to these sites, but mainly we find these rock drawings on the mainland and in islands offshore, because the 4th cataract area and the cataract normally we have more than hundreds of islands in the 4th cataract area, and about 99 small islands around Mograt Island. So this is a rocky area full of engravings, and then if we will stay 30 years, we can't study all the area. And just we had 10 years to study all this area and to make a salvage. So we tried always to study and to collect the information in hurry. We have a season just 1 or 2 months per year. It was the time fact it wasn't quite enough to study all the area, but anyhow, we try to collect the information. So in mainland and islands, and also we find, especially in the wadis. So the wadis, this is the running water on the island or in the mainland, which you find the rocks between, and the entrance of the wadi and the middle of the wadi, and both banks of these wadis, we find this engraving. In the area of cataracts, approximately the area was really granite blocks, and in the same time we have some examples of the sandstone also. So also close to the river, because sometimes the river bank is really huge, and then we find some settlement or some archaeological sites, and then after this we find also this, there are so many blocks with full of archaeological sites and engravings. So here I just try to go a little bit faster, because we have many archaeological sites, many engraving, but just I try to give you some highlights about the animals. Here we have wild animals. We have many elephants and different size, different type of elephants with different engraving style, each hammering, picturing lines, And we have just one example of hippo in the island of Mograt that also can give us an idea that the wild animal, especially the elephant and the hippo, there's not quite enough in the area. But if I look into the giraffe, we find more giraffe in the region. Suzanne said that there is no giraffe at that time, but if I look into the cataract, you find many giraffes. Even in archaeological sites, they find some bones. So that means at that time, at that time, I think they supposed to have, wild animals in the cataract area. Different giraffe with different, decoration. Here we have similar giraffe like that one in, I think, in South Sudan and even in Namibia. The antelope, variety of antelopes with different horn, which can also give us that the area, the people, I think they know how to hunt the animals like gazelle, like antelope, like other wild animal. We find also gazelle, which could be gazelle dorcas in the area of Mograt Island in the side of Sehan. There are another type of animals which supposed, for the first time I asking Louise checks, he said to me that could be lion because the shape of the engraving give us some ideas about this should be lions. But anyhow, this is wild animal. For the second type of animals that we find the kettles. So we have many sites which are full of kettles with different type of horns, long horn, modified horn with like that one which you find in southern Sudan. Up to date, they used to supposed to change the horn to be very. It's like as a tradition that if when they have this long horn and sometimes close like this. In Karma also we find, I think, the kettles was very important that they found around the cemetery and graves. Here we find more than 7 types of kettles, which can be differentiated with horn and with in details inside. On the middle, for example, it can be compared with that one, which could be dated in the third and the area of Upper Nubia to the C group, but just could be some influence with this because the first cataract we don't have any evidence of C group. So if you look into the distribution of the domestication cattle in Northern America, in Northern Africa, we find that there are many archaeological sites which can be evidence that they found, cattle bones, and which we dated, for example, in Kadada to the 6th millennia, and in Nabtablaya also. So this can help us also that the cattle introduced in Nubia very early and find in many archaeological sites up to date. There are some cattle which are associated with the human figure, which can give us also how the people can, they know the domestication of cattle very early in Nubia. Because if you are looking to the left top, we find that cattle with a small and their human figure try to, over there. So this can give us an idea about the domestication of cattle. The camel also, we find, I think, 20% of our engravings are camels. So that means camels in the area of the fourth and fifth cataract was common, which should be also come very a little bit late in the 1st century AD to the Nubia. And we find camel like isolated or in caravan or in group. And some camels we find also like in the scene of fighting. So camel used in different to bring luggage and even using in war. Also, some examples associated with the cross that also give us that the camel during the Christian period in the area was an important animal. Also, this map can give us some information about how the camel come to Africa from the Middle East and from Saudi Arabia. About horse, also, the horse, we find some examples of horses which can also introduce like the, horseman and using also in the scene of battles. Hunting scene also, we find some examples, like hunting ostrich in different style, which over there, for example, on the left, we find that there we have two engravings: the hunting scene, that some guy hunting ostrich, and camel, which should be engraved a little bit later. So this is also can help us. In one border, we can find differentiation between the patina and engraving, which could be easier to have a datation from the border, but not a fixed datation. There are some reptiles like leathers or crocodile. We don't have many because in the cataract normally up to date we have crocodiles. When the Chinese started bombing the stone, with the dynamite, there are still crocodiles. But in engraving, we don't have, just one example or two examples. This is also can make some question about this animal, how I don't know. The Christian time, I think the area of the Fourth Cataract, there are many archaeological sites which can be dated to the Christian. And also this can be highlight that the ideas of three kingdoms of the Christianity in Sudan, I think we have to look for the fourth one, which can be, I think, suggested by some scholars, that's Al-Abwab, the kingdom. Because the area of Fourth Cataract, we find more than 20 or 30 fortresses can be dated to the Christian time, and more than, I think, 10 churches with symmetry, with the engravings. This is also can give us idea about why the Christianity in this region are like this. Because it's between Maguria and Alodia. So Maguria it's just between the third and fourth cataract, and Alodia it's just south, close to Khartoum and the Blue Nile. So all the area between fourth cataract and sixth cataract, so we have to check. It needs a lot of study. I think Bogdan is here. But from the rock art, I think we have many examples that could be like church, like cross with different type of cross, consonant with animals and sometimes with other things. There are many geometric also had been found in the site, and I think in Wadi Hawar they found similar geometric like this, which could be dated to the early Neolithic time. But I don't know why they just make it like this. For example, this could be for the first time they said like a game, but just also after the Christianity, that's some sort of continuation. In the same borders, you can find elephant or gazelle. In the next just borders, you can find some crosses. And the opposite also border, you can find this is which you call it shahada, because for us it's like the Islamic sentence. You can know God but one God, Muhammad is his prophet. So for us, when we ask the people around the sites, we do a small ethnographical survey. We ask them about this graffiti. Who made this graffiti? Who made the engraving? And for what reason? So we check that there's some continuity. So it started from very early, and it continued up to the Islamic period. And even we find some Arabic name, which can be also give us that the people, they think first time that the jinn or shaitan made this engraving. The second thing is that their ancestors and then grandfathers made this. So that means they almost continue to do that. So we find even Arabic names, modern names, with some for the human figures, we find different style of human figures, which can, some of them are very early, like this one here. And the style of this engraving of this human figure sometimes very difficult to recognize, because it can just tell us that some theory could be related with the religion or with the thought of the people at that time. Some of them that's really realistic, because it can tell us a story, real story, that's their fight between them. Some engraving tell us also that some could be symbol of fertility. As Bruce Williams said, that the boats in the cataract with variety, I think if you look into the area of Sabo, we find that the pre-dynastic type of boats, they are really well known. And some boats, for example, like that one on the left top, that could be Christian, as Bogdan and Bruce Williams mentioned that. But this one, I think, could be very close to that one, which in Sabo, which dated the pre-dynastic period. So we have very variety of boats which can be dated to the early period up to the Christian or the Islamic period. Also in the area, we find many examples of rock gongs, which can also give us an idea about some uses of these rock gongs, because sometimes it's found in the plateau, on the top of mountains, between some village, and close to one of them, we find the church in Bonny Island and Ouse Island, which can give us also that it's like some sort of drum, and it's give some meaning, because in the Muslim times we have this like a large drum, which can use it for during the war, during the festivals, to send the message. And here we have a complex rock gongs, and sometimes can be played for 3 or 4 persons. That means there's some sort of tradition that people stay together to make some ceremony. It could be religion, it could be other tradition. But it's when we try to, we make some video, but unfortunately we don't have it. But it gives us very nice music, different rhythm, and some of them at vertical, horizontal, and the top of plateau. And so it's different and variety. Here we have some just to tell you that the engravings in Bonny Island, for example, camel, that's more than 50% of the engraving, and in Sehan we find that human figure, they are almost 20 or 30%. In Dar el Arab of area of we find the cross. So there are some variety of concentration, camel cross, and then human figure. That means every area have the quantity of engravings are different. They are not all together in the same. Here, there are some just different technique used in engravings. from the three area. So with the percentage, so executed in co and with the small circles, and that they cover all the space and depict in line. So the incision. So there we find all these things, I think, in one region that can give us also that the details of this technique had been used in the Desert Cataract and in Sahara. Also, the patina, which can help us to differentiate that the engraving in one border or different border, but sometimes it could be affected by the sun, direct sun, or hot. There are some engraving, for us it's a little bit different. For example, here we have in this engraving giraffe and rider, which can also sample, because we find in the same borders camels with cross and giraffe and rider. So also can give us some meanings about this white giraffe with rider, and is also with the cross. We find I think the unique engravings that somebody holding some, lance and sword, and there are crocodile underneath. And when I just asked professor in Lille, he said that could be, I don't know, but just he gave me these pictures. He said, okay, this is in the Egyptian, that could be a crocodile hunter. I don't know. In first cataract, we didn't find any Egyptian influence, but yeah, just I put the question because maybe in future there somebody find similar engraving can give us. Yeah. So I think the closer area of the first cataract and fifth cataract, I think the third cataract area, which approximately there are many similarity between the technique and uses of the percentage of animals and crosses and boats. And I found that technically the third cataract, it is similar with the fourth cataract and fifth cataract. So this is also can tell us that in the people, when they made the rock engravings, they think also there are some continuity, because if the transportation was with a camel in the past, now they use the lorries. And with Bogdan Zurawisky, I think when we started the first cataract, there is no buses, just lorry to transport from Krima to the first cataract. So for me, when I find this engraving, this of lorry, I ask the people, said, okay, this is automatically just the continuation of the transportation. Now we use lorry. So this is just can give us that people think always that's engraving some sort of heritage. It cannot be stopped. So the idea of the salvage project in the first cataract to help to rescue some samples of the engravings, and with the help of the company Iveco and the British Museum, and also they think the Gdansk Museum also take part of this object, and now we find it unfortunately in Joel Barkel Museum. The idea is that the administration of Merowe Dam to build a special museum which can make similarity like cataracts with water, with blocks like this, and fix all these blocks. But anyhow, we have some examples of rock engravings saved in Sudan, because if not, gonna be underwater. So to conclude, I think the representation of the rock drawings in Nubia, their variety and could be dated from the early periods up to the Islamic period, and also can be divided in simplistic and or not realistic, or realistic or not realistic. So if you are looking here, we find really That's the people who made the engraving, they made it naturalist. But in number one, just we find the shape. So that means I think there are some body, some of them are really professionalists. They made it to tell us a story about this. Some of them just, they make shape, and it's not realistic. So this is also can be classified in our study. So I would like to thank dear colleague from Kelsey Museum, Jeff and Suzanne, and also the National Corporation for Antiquities Museum, colleague from Cologne and from Humboldt, and Nikam also. And thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, we have a plastic sheet with a special pen like this, and then we fixed the plastic on the top of the panels. So to wait some, the good time to draw it, and then to scan it.
Okay. So you're not rubbing over it, you're actually drawing.
Yeah. This is another technique, but I think the material is, Yeah, welcome.